Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's for me a great honor to welcome Javier Milei. As you know, he's the freely elected president of Argentina, and it's actually your first trip to a foreign country after you have been elected. First, congratulations for your election, and congratulations also to your sister, who managed your election campaign. I think you, sometimes people would say with more radical methods, but you introduce a new spirit to Argentina, making Argentina much more related to free enterprise, to entrepreneurial activities, also to bring Argentina back to the rule of law. So we have a very extraordinary person among us today, and of course we are all eager to listen to you, and again a very cordial welcome to the World Economic Forum.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Hoy estoy acá
Today, I'm here
para decirles que Occidente
to tell you
está en
that
peligro.
the Western world is in danger.
Está en peligro porque
And it
aquellos que
is
supuestamente
endangered
deben defender
because
los valores
those
de
who are
Occidente
supposed to have to
se
defend the
encuentran
values of the
atrapados
West
por una visión del
are
mundo
co-opted by a
inexorablemente conduce al
vision of the
fascismo,
world that
en
inexorably
consecuencia,
leads to
a la
socialism
pobreza.
and thereby to poverty.
Lamentablemente,
Unfortunately,
en las últimas
in
décadas,
recent decades,
motivados por algunos deseos
motivated
impulsantes de
by
querer
some
ayudar al prójimo
well-meaning
y otros por el deseo de
individuals
pertenecer a una
willing
casta
to help
privilegiada,
others, and others
los
motivated
principales
by the
líderes
wish to
del mundo
belong to a
occidental
privileged
han
caste,
abandonado
the
el
main
modelo de la
leaders of the
libertad
Western world have
por distintas
abandoned the
versiones de
model
lo que
of
llamamos
freedom
colectivismo.
for different versions of what we call
Nosotros estamos acá
collectivism.
para decirles que
We're
los
here
experimentos
to tell you that
colectivistas
collectivist
nunca son la
experiments
solución a los
are
problemas que
never
aquejan a
the
los ciudadanos del
solution
mundo,
to
sino
the
que por el
problems
contrario
that
son
afflict the
su
citizens
causa.
of the world. Rather,
Créanme,
they are the root cause.
nadie mejor que
Do believe
nosotros
me,
los argentinos para dar
no one
testimonios
better placed
de
than
estas dos
us,
cuestiones.
Argentines, to testify to these 2
Cuando
points.
adoptamos el modelo de la
When we
libertad,
adopted the
allá por el
model
año
of
1860,
freedom back in
en 35 años
1860,
nos convertimos
in
en la primer
35
potencia
years we
mundial.
became a
Mientras que cuando
leading
abrazamos
world
el
power.
colectivismo,
And when
a
we
lo largo de los
embraced
últimos 100 años,
collectivism over the course of
vimos
the
cómo
last
nuestros ciudadanos
100 years,
comenzaron a
we saw how our
empobrezarse
citizens
sistemáticamente
started
hasta
to
caer
become
en el puesto
systematically
número
impoverished, and we
140 del
dropped
mundo.
to spot number
Pero antes de poder dar
140
esta
globally.
discusión,
But before
sería importante
having
que
the
primero
discussion, it
midiéramos
would
los datos
first be
que
important for us to
sustentan
take a
por qué el
look at the
capitalismo de libre
data
empresa
that
no
demonstrate
solo es un
why
sistema posible
free
para terminar con la
enterprise
pobreza en el
capitalism
mundo,
is not just
sino
the
que es el
only
único
possible
sistema
system to end
moralmente
world
deseable
poverty,
para
but
lograrlo.
also that it's the only morally
consideramos la historia del
desirable
progreso
system to achieve
económico,
this. If we look at
podemos
the
ver cómo
history
desde
of
el año
economic
0 hasta el
progress,
año
we can see
1800
how between the year 0 and the year
el PIB per cápita del
1800
mundo
approximately,
prácticamente se mantuvo constante
world per
durante todo el
capita
periodo de
GDP
referencia.
practically remained constant throughout the
Si uno mira
whole
un gráfico de la
reference period.
evolución del
If you look at a
crecimiento
graph
económico a
of
lo
the
largo de la historia de la
evolution of
humanidad,
economic
uno
growth
estaría viendo un
throughout the
gráfico
history
con
of
la forma de un palo
humanity,
de
you would
hockey.
see a
Una
hockey
función
stick graph,
exponencial
an
que se mantuvo
exponential
constante
function that
durante el
remained
90%
constant
del
for
tiempo
90% of the
y se
time,
dispara
and
exponencialmente
which
a
was
partir del siglo
exponentially
XIX.
triggered starting in the
La
19th
única
century.
excepción a esta
The only
historia, el
exception
estancamiento
to
se
this
dio
history of
a finales del
stagnation
siglo XV con
was
el
in the late
descubrimiento de
15th
América.
century with the discovery
Pero
of the
salvando
American
esta
continent.
excepción, a lo
But for
largo de
this
todo el periodo
exception,
entre el año
throughout the
0 y
whole
el año
period between the year
1800,
0
el
and the
PIB
year
per cápita a nivel
1800,
global se mantuvo
global
estancado.
per capita
Ahora
GDP
bien,
stagnated.
no solo que el capitalismo generó
Now,
una
it's
explosión de
not just
riqueza
that
desde el momento que
capitalism
se
brought
adoptó
about an
como
explosion
sistema
in
económico,
wealth from the
sino
moment it
que
was
si uno
adopted as an
analiza los
economic
datos,
system. But
lo que
also,
se
if you look
observa
at the
es que el
data, what you
crecimiento
will
se
see
vino
is that
acelerando
growth
a lo largo de todo el periodo.
continues to accelerate throughout the whole
Durante todo el
period.
periodo
And throughout
comprendido
the
entre el
whole
año 0
period
y
between the year
1800,
0 and
la tasa
the
de
year
crecimiento del PIB
1800,
per cápita se
the
mantuvo
per
estable
capita
en torno al
GDP growth rate
0,02%
remained stable at around
anual, es decir,
0.02%
prácticamente sin
annually, so
crecimiento.
almost no growth. Starting in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, the compound annual growth rate was 0.66%. And at that rate, in order to double per capita GDP, you would need some 107 years. Now, if you look at the period between the year 1900 and the year 1950, the growth rate accelerated to 1.66% a year. So you no longer need 107 years to double per capita GDP, but 66. And if you take the period between 1950 and the year 2000, you will see that the growth rate was 2.1%. Again, the CAGR, which would mean that in only 33 years we could double the world's per capita GDP. This trend, far from stopping, remains well alive today. If we take the period between the year 2000 and 2023, the growth rate again accelerated to 3% a year, which means that we could double world per capita GDP in just 23 years. That said, when you look at per capita GDP since the year 1800 and until today, what you will see is that after the Industrial Revolution, global per capita GDP multiplied by over 15 times, which meant a boom in growth that lifted 90% of the global population out of poverty. We should remember that by the year 1800, about 95% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, and that figure dropped to 5% by the year 2020, prior to the pandemic. The conclusion is obvious. Far from being the cause of our problems, free trade capitalism as an economic system is the only instrument we have to end hunger, poverty, and extreme poverty across our planet. The empirical evidence is unquestionable. Therefore, since there is no doubt that free enterprise capitalism is superior in productive terms, the left-wing doxa has attacked capitalism, alleging matters of morality, saying, that's what the detractors claim, that it's unjust. They say that capitalism is evil because it's individualistic, and that collectivism is good because it's altruistic, of course, with the money of others. So they therefore advocate for social justice. But this concept, which in the developed world became fashionable in recent times, in my country has been a constant in political discourse for over 80 years. The problem is that social justice is not just, and it doesn't contribute either to the general well-being. Quite on the contrary, it's an intrinsically unfair idea because it's violent. It's unjust because the state is financed through tax. And taxes are collected coercively. Or can any one of us say that they voluntarily pay taxes? Which means that the state is financed through coercion, and that the higher the tax burden, the higher the coercion, and the lower the freedom. Those who promote social justice, the advocates, start with the idea that the whole economy is a pie that can be shared differently. But that pie is not a given. It's wealth that is generated in what Israel Kirzner, for instance, calls a market discovery process. If the goods or services offered by a business are not wanted, the business will fail unless it adapts to what the market is demanding. If they make a good quality product at an attractive price, they will do well and produce more. So the market is a discovery process in which the capitalists will find the right path as they move forward. But if the state punishes capitalists when they're successful and gets in the way of the discovery process, they will destroy their incentives, and the consequence is that they will produce less, the pie will be smaller, and this will harm society as a whole. Collectivism, by inhibiting these discovery processes and hindering the appropriation of discoveries, ends up binding the hands of entrepreneurs and prevents them from offering better goods and services at a better price. So how come that academia, international organizations, economic theory and politics demonize an economic system that has not only lifted out of extreme poverty 90% of the world's population, but has continued to do this faster and faster, and this is morally superior and just. Thanks to free trade capitalism, it is to be seen that the world is now living its best moment. Never in all of mankind's or humanity's history history has there been a time of more prosperity than today. This is true for all. The world of today has more freedom, is richer, is more peaceful and prosperous. And this is particularly true for countries that have more freedom and have economic freedom and respect the property rights of individuals, because countries that have more freedom are 12 times richer than those that are repressed, and the lowest decile in terms of distribution in free countries are better off than 90% of the population of repressed countries, and poverty is 25 times lower, and extreme poverty is 50 times lower. And citizens in free countries live 25% longer than citizens in repressed countries. Now, what is it that we mean when we talk about libertarianism? And let me quote the words of the greatest authority on freedom in Argentina, Professor Alberto Venegas Lech Jr., who says that libertarianism is the unrestricted respect for the life project of others, based on the principle of non-aggression, in defense of the right to life, liberty and property. Its fundamental institutions being private property, markets free from state intervention, free competition, the division of labor, and social cooperation, as part of which success is achieved only by serving others with goods of better quality or at a better price. In other words, capitalists, successful business people are social benefactors who, far from appropriating the wealth of others, contribute to the general well-being. Ultimately, a successful entrepreneur is a hero. And this is the model that we are advocating for the Argentina of the future, a model based on the fundamental principles of libertarianism, the defense of life, of freedom, and of property. Now, if free enterprise capitalism and economic freedom have proven to be extraordinary instruments to end poverty in the world, and we are now at the best time in the history of humanity, it is worth asking why I say that the West is endangered. And I say this precisely because in those of our countries that should defend the values of the free market, private property, and the other institutions of libertarianism, sectors of the political and economic establishment, some due to mistakes in their theoretical framework and others due to a greed for power, are undermining the foundations of libertarianism, opening up the doors to socialism and potentially condemning us to poverty, misery and stagnation. It should never be forgotten that socialism is always and everywhere an impoverishing phenomenon that has failed in all countries where it's been tried out. It's been a failure economically, socially, culturally, and it also murdered over 100 million human beings. The essential problem in the West today is not just that we need to come to grips with those who, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the overwhelming empirical evidence, continue to advocate for impoverishing socialism. But there's also our own leaders, thinkers, and academics who, relying on a misguided theoretical framework, undermine the fundamentals of the system that has given us the greatest expansion of wealth and prosperity in our history. The theoretical framework to which I refer is that of neoclassical economic theory, which designs a set of instruments that unwillingly, or without meaning to, ends up serving the intervention by the state, socialism and social degradation. The problem with neoclassicals is that the model they fell in love with does not map reality, so they put down their mistakes to supposed market failures rather than reviewing the premises of the model. On the pretext of a supposed market failure, regulations are introduced which only create distortions in the price system, prevent economic calculus, and therefore also prevent saving, investment and growth. This problem lies mainly in the fact that not even supposedly libertarian economists understand what the market is, because if they did understand, it would quickly be seen that it's impossible for there to be something along the lines of market failures. The market is not a mere graph describing a curve of supply and demand. The market is a mechanism for social cooperation where you voluntarily exchange ownership rights. Therefore, based on this definition, talking about a market failure is an oxymoron. There are no market failures. If transactions are voluntary, the only context in which there can be a market failure is if there is coercion. And the only one that is able to coerce generally is the state, which holds a monopoly on violence. Consequently, if someone considers that there is a market failure, I would suggest that they check to see if the state intervention involved. And if they find that that's not the case, I would suggest that they check again, because obviously there's a mistake. Market failures do not exist. An example of these so-called market failures described by the neoclassicals are the concentrated structures of the economy. However, without increasing returns to scale functions, whose counterpart are the concentrated structures of the economy, we couldn't possibly explain economic growth since the year 1800 until today. Isn't this interesting? Since the year 1800 onwards, with population multiplying by 8 or 9 times, per capita GDP grown by over 15 times. So there are growing returns, which took extreme poverty from 95% to 5%. However, the presence of growing returns involves concentrated structures, what we would call a monopoly. How come then that something that has generated so much well-being for the neoclassical theory is a market failure? Neoclassical economists think outside of the box. When the model fails, you shouldn't get angry with reality, but rather with the model and change it. The dilemma faced by the neoclassical model is that they say they wish to perfect the functioning of the market by attacking what they consider to be failures. But in so doing, they don't just open up the doors to socialism, but also go against economic growth. An example, regulating monopolies, destroying their profits and destroying growing returns automatically would destroy economic growth. In other words, whenever you want to correct a supposed market failure inexorably, as a result of not knowing what the market is, or as a result of having fallen in love with a failed model, you are opening up the doors to socialism and condemning people to poverty. However, faced with the theoretical demonstration that state intervention is harmful and the empirical evidence that it has failed couldn't have been otherwise, the solution to be proposed by collectivists is not greater freedom, but rather greater regulation, which creates a downward spiral of regulations until we're all poorer and the life of all of us depends on a bureaucrat sitting in a luxury office. Given the dismal failure of collectivist models and the undeniable advances in the free world, socialists were forced to change their agenda. They left behind the class struggle based on the economic system and replaced this with other supposed social conflicts which are just as harmful to life as a community and to economic growth. The first of these new battles was the ridiculous and unnatural fight between man and woman. Libertarianism already provides for equality of these sexes. The cornerstone of our creed says that all humans are created equal, that we all have the same unalienable rights granted by the Creator, including life, freedom, and ownership. All that this radical feminism agenda has led to is greater state intervention to hinder the economic process, giving a job to bureaucrats who have not contributed anything to society. Examples, ministries of women or international organizations devoted to promoting this agenda. Another conflict presented by socialists is that of humans against nature, claiming that we human beings damage the planet, which should be protected at all costs, even going as far as advocating for population control mechanisms or the bloody abortion agenda. Unfortunately, these harmful ideas have taken a strong hold in our society. Neo-Marxists have managed to co-opt the common sense of the Western world, and this they have achieved by appropriating the media, culture, universities, and also international organizations. The latter case is the most serious one, probably, because these are institutions that have enormous influence on political and economic decisions of the countries that make up the multilateral organizations. Fortunately, there's more and more of us who are daring to make our voices heard, because we see that if we don't truly and decisively fight against these ideas, the only possible fate is for us to have increasing levels of state regulation, socialism, poverty, and less freedom, and therefore will be having worse standards of living. The West has unfortunately already started to go along this path. I know to many it may sound ridiculous to suggest that the West has turned to socialism, but it's only ridiculous if you only limit yourself to the traditional economic definition of socialism, which says that it's an economic system where the state owns the means of production. This definition, in my view, should be updated in the light of current circumstances. Today, states don't need to directly control the means of production to control every aspect of the lives of individuals. With tools such as printing money, debt, subsidies, controlling the interest rate, price controls, and regulations to correct the so-called market failures, they can control the lives and fates of millions of individuals. This is how we come to the point where, by using different names or guises, a good deal of the generally accepted political offers in most Western countries are collectivist variants, whether they proclaim to be openly communists, fascists, Nazis, socialists, social democrats, national socialists, Democrat Christians, Christian Democrats, neo-Keynesians, progressive, populist, nationalists, or globalists. At bottom, there are no major differences. They all say that the state should steer all aspects of the lives of individuals. They all defend a model contrary to that one which led humanity to the most spectacular progress in its history. We have come here today to invite the rest of the countries in the Western world to get back on the path of prosperity, economic freedom, limited government, and unlimited respect for private property are essential elements for economic growth. And the impoverishment produced by collectivism is no fantasy, nor is it an inescapable fate. But it's a reality that we Argentines know very well. We have lived through this, we have been through this, because as I said earlier, ever since we decided to abandon the model of freedom that had made us rich, we have been caught up in a downward spiral, as part of which we are poorer and poorer day by day. So this is something we have lived through, and we are here to warn you about what can happen if the countries in the Western world that became rich through the model of freedom stay on this path of servitude. The case of Argentina is an empirical demonstration that no matter how rich you may be, or how much you may have in terms of natural resources, or how skilled your population may be, or educated, or how many bars of gold you may have in the central bank, if measures are adopted that hinder the free functioning of markets, free competition, free price systems, if you hinder trade, if you attack private property, the only possible fate is poverty. Therefore, in concluding, I would like to leave a message for all business people here and for those who are not here in person but are following from around the world. Do not be intimidated either by the political class or by parasites who live off the state. Do not surrender to a political class that only wants to stay in power and retain its privileges. You are social benefactors, you're heroes, you're the creators of the most extraordinary period of prosperity we've ever seen. Let no one tell you that your ambition is immoral. If you make money, it's because you offer a better product at a better price, thereby contributing to general well-being. Do not surrender to the advance of the state. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem itself. You are the true protagonists of this story. And rest assured that as from today, Argentina is your staunch, unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long live freedom. Damn it.